in the scriptures that we just read, in verse 15, for example, notice that it says that Gog has many people. It's a great assembly, a large army. Is it Satan the devil? No. It would appear that this would be a coalition of nations. Yes, they'd be inspired by Satan the devil, who would attempt to destroy Jehovah's people. Will this coalition be led by the king of the north? We really don't know. We can't say. What impact will this have upon us? Will it mean that we will have to change our lifestyle? Probably. Will it mean that we may be impacted economically? That there may be food shortages, property loss? We would have to find out. We'll just have to wait and see. What hardships will come about, we just do not know. However, what we do know is that when Gog attacks, we will need courage. What can we do, though?
Okay, well, that was obviously a brief excerpt from the convention symposium that we've been considering over the course of the last few videos. This one concerning the attack of Gog of Magog upon the restored land of Israel. It's interesting that this prophecy obviously has to do with the final judgment and confrontation between the nations and Jehovah, or in reality, it will be Christ's kingdom ruling at that time. And the 39th chapter goes into God's invitation to the wild beasts and the birds to feed upon the flesh and blood of the fallen who fought against God's kingdom. And this harmonizes, of course, with what we read in the 19th chapter of Revelation, where Jehovah invites all the birds of heaven to feast the great evening meal of God upon the carcasses of those who were fighting against him. Ironically, this is one prophecy that the Watchtower cannot say has already been fulfilled, because it obviously has a future fulfillment. Of course, those would-be Bible interpreters in Christendom, the evangelicals, sees this, and they say that Gog is Russia, and Israel is Israel in the Middle East. But we won't even consider that because it's ridiculous. Israel is obviously spiritual Israel. 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Standing upon heavenly Mount Zion with the name of Jehovah and Jesus on their forehead. That is the Israel we're talking about. That is those who will be part of the kingdom. And while they are on the earth, Jehovah has to deal with them, correct them, if you will. Well, leading up to this, the Watchtower has considered how Babylon the Great will fall and Jehovah's Witnesses will issue this scathing hailstone judgment message. And Jehovah's Witnesses are given the impression that where they are now will be the same as in the future when these things take place, that the Watchtower will guide Jehovah's Witnesses through the attack of Gog of Magog and on into paradise. Well, yesterday I spoke briefly about the prophecy of Joel. And anyone who reads that, obviously it cannot possibly be the way the Watchtower claims. So there's something else between here and there that is completely unanticipated, unexpected, and incomprehensible presently to Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's interesting, several of these brothers, it's interesting how, if you listen to their discourse, how many times they say, we don't know. Will this attack from Gog of Magog, will that relate to the king of the north? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. Ironically, that's what I've been saying all along. They don't know. But all prophecy is harmonious, interwoven, as it were. In fact, if you read those 2 chapters of Gog of Magog, 38 and 39, Jehovah is speaking to Gog. He says, are you not the one I have spoken of through the mouth of my prophets of old? So there is verification in other prophecies, harmonization. Prophecy is like 3D chess or something, It's on different levels, but it is all joined together. If that makes sense. So you can't just take a piece here and a piece there. We might liken it also to a jigsaw puzzle. And you might have a few pieces in place, but unless you have all the pieces in the correct place, you can't see the big picture. So Jehovah's Witnesses have this picture in their mind that this is Jehovah's organization that is going to survive intact. I mean, the brother speculates, will we lose property? I don't know. Well, let's get into some scriptures here. And as I say, all prophecy is harmonious. In the 39th chapter, closing out God's discussion, in verse 22 he says, let's go up to verse 21. I will display my glory among the nations, and all the nations will see the judgment that I have executed and the power that I have demonstrated among them, among these Israelites, so-called. And from that day on, the house of Israel will have to know that I am Jehovah their God. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses will say, matter of factly, Jehovah is God. Jehovah is our God. The brothers here on these symposiums, they're boasting, we will continue to worship Jehovah, our God. We'll stand like a sore thumb. Huh? How will they be made to know he is Jehovah God, though? It's one thing to say, we worship Jehovah. This is, Jehovah's organization and all that. But when Jehovah talks about one coming to know that he is Jehovah, it's not a pleasant affair. In other words, it requires a strong hand and discipline to impose his presence, his will. When God says the nations will see his glory, he's talking about the glory of Christ, the coming of Christ. The nations will only see the sign of the Son of Man, and of course they'll be terrified by it. But notice in verse 23, and the nations will have to know that the house of Israel went into exile because of their own error, because they were unfaithful to me. So I hid my face from them and handed them over to their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanness and their transgressions, and I hid my face from them. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says, I will restore the captives of Jacob and have mercy on the whole house of Israel, and I will zealously defend my holy name. And after they have been humiliated for all their unfaithfulness toward me, and they will dwell in security in their land with no one to make them afraid. When I bring them back from the peoples and collect them together from the lands of their enemies, I will also sanctify myself among them before the eyes of many nations, and they will have to know that I am Jehovah their God when I send them into exile among the nations and then gather them back to their land, not leaving any behind. One of the things Jesus spoke about when his disciples came to him on the Mount of Olives and said, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will?" And Jesus spoke about wars, the sword, famine, food shortages. And then he said that toward the close of his discussion, he would send forth his angels, and a great trumpet would sound, and he would gather the chosen ones from the four corners of the earth where they've been scattered. That's what this is talking about. Christ's congregation will be scattered, disbanded. If you go back and read in Ezekiel chapters 36 and 37, leading up to this attack of Gog of Magog, Jehovah gives an illustration to Ezekiel. He said, "Do you see these dry bones?" And Jehovah causes them to come to life. He says, "I will make you come to life, and you will come alive." Well, that is coming alive in the fullest sense spiritually, this house of Israel. And it also includes those sleeping in Christ who were in union with Christ who have died. Going back to the first century, the apostles, they sleep in death until Christ returns. And then they come to life. That is how the whole house of Israel comes to life. And those remaining on earth, after they suffer this humiliation, come to life. I believe that's what is stated in, the very last verse of chapter 39. "I will not hide my face from them any longer, for I will pour out my spirit on the house of Israel," declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah. So that's what I spoke about yesterday in Joel. "In the last days, I will pour out my spirit upon sons and daughters. They will prophesy," and so forth. It's the full outpouring so that God's organization is transformed into the full stature of Jesus Christ. And that is what Gog of Magog attacks. The restored kingdom, the fully completed kingdom, you might say. Jehovah starts off that prophecy speaking to Gog of Magog, just as he spoke to the serpent in Eden. And brother speculates Gog of Magog is a coalition of nations. Well, yeah. But it's interesting, none of the nations, part of that coalition that are mentioned there, were the great nations of biblical times. It doesn't mention Greece or Egypt or Babylon or what these small nations. And that is because Gog represents this eighth king, which has not come on the scene yet. And that is a key component of what is lacking in the Watchtower's prophetic exegesis, you might say. Because the coming alive of the eighth king obviously comes about because of the death, the sword stroke upon the head of the beast. When it comes back to life, it will be a different system of things. The nation-state system will be subjugated to a one world government, an empire. And so all the protections of freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom, that'll all be done away with. And in fact, that's how the house of Israel goes into exile, is brought to nothing, because Jehovah's Witnesses rely upon these freedoms afforded them by the so-called democratic system. Now, the brother, he mentioned there that, is this the king of the north? We don't know. Well, they should know, because as I mentioned, Jehovah says to Gog, are you not the one from of old times whom I've spoke about through my prophets? And that would be, of course, including Daniel. The prophecy, of course, as is obvious, has fulfillment in the final part of the days. Well, if you pick up the trail of the king of the north, king of the south, where it speaks about a pushing in the time of the end, and the king of the south is subjugated, Egypt falls and becomes subject to the king of the north. But included with that, in the time of the end, the king of the north comes into the decorated land. And that represents this Israel, spiritual Israel, Christ's congregation. And the Watchtower knows that. I mean, they've taught that for years. Well, they say that was fulfilled back during World War II somehow, some way. Doesn't make any sense. But they explain it in a way that seems credible to those who look to this oracle as a mouthpiece of God. But as I've proven, demonstrated, spoken about repeatedly, the time of the end has not occurred yet. It's not begun. So that incursion into the decorated land is what Jehovah is speaking about in Ezekiel, that brings about the humiliation, how his people fall by the sword. During that time of the end, that initiates world war, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Doesn't mean they'll all be killed by the sword. They'll be humiliated, because the Watchtower has taught that, oh yeah, the World War I, that was it. It's over. Only thing to take place is the fall of Babylon the Great. We don't know. I'll agree with that. We don't know exactly how the work will be suppressed. I do know the financial system will collapse, so the money will be, a different money system will be set up, so that the Watchtower will have to deal with that. But then if you read on down, it mentions that the king of the north will come and set up his tent in the mountain of decoration. Well, a few verses up, it had already said he comes into the land of decoration, a little different than the mountain. But he sets his tent there. In other words, he takes over that domain, seemingly, gets rid of the inhabitants, seemingly. When Christ comes and this humiliation takes place, then the restoration, that is the mountain that comes to be in the land of decoration. And so Christ's congregation is laid low, then it's restored in a much elevated position. What's Isaiah say? In the final part of the days, the mountain of the house of Jehovah will be lifted up above the hills, and to it peoples will stream. That hasn't happened yet, obviously. And I've mentioned that in previous videos, because has Jehovah set matters straight? Think again. But Jehovah does have matters, obviously, to set straight with those who bear his name. And I won't go into it. You know all the issues. I mean, people always leave comments. Yeah, don't forget the Watchtowers a member of the United Nations as an NGO. Don't forget the Watchtower owned military stocks. And the Watchtower, child abuse, you name it. Jehovah has a lot of things to settle. And when he sets things straight, it will be very painful. But the scriptures show he will be merciful, restore those whom he's laid low, mend the broken bone that he has struck. So this mountain in this decorated land is the fully restored kingdom with the sealed sons on earth, the ones who are shining as brightly as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And there are disturbing reports that go to the king of the north. Hard-hitting message? Apparently. These reports obviously have to do with the fact that the restored sons of the kingdom have seen Christ Jesus. And they are witnesses of that fact. That's what the two witnesses are. They will have witnessed Jesus. Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration in the vision. They weren't really Moses and Elijah, but on the vision of the Transfiguration, they saw Jesus in his glory, and they conversed with him. Well, we have Moses and Elijah turn up in the 11th chapter of Revelation as the two witnesses, dressed in sackcloth, as I mentioned, in their period of humiliation. But they give witness to the fact that Jesus is among them. So, Jehovah has an issue to settle. We know that. And the Watchtower has made that clear to us. We appreciate that. The issue goes back to Eden. Satan has accused Jehovah of being a liar. He can't trust his creatures. He knows that if you know good and bad, you'll be like him. He can't have that. So God's purpose is to select a chosen few, many actually, 144,000 ultimately. Many are called, but those are the final ones that are actually chosen and sealed. But they're given immortality, and means that they'll never, ever be unfaithful to God, even though they will no longer need God to give them life. They'll have life in themselves. Anyway, I won't go into that here again, but so once this sealing has taken place, Jehovah is basically saying, I've got my team here. Christianity's over. Preaching is over. Disciple making is over. This is it. God's people will have been gathered into the holy mountain, ready to go into the new world. And in that sense, they're dwelling in the center of the earth. But because Jehovah will have done a great thing in this ingathering, not the gathering of Jehovah's Witnesses taking place now, because there is a regathering. Right? The scriptures we read about these people have been unfaithful to me, and that's why I punished them. That's why I've sent them into exile temporarily. The Watchtower says that Christians went into exile to Babylon the Great 16 centuries ago. But that wasn't punishment, was it? That was just an apostasy. So anyway, once God has his people, his 7,000 sealed ones, then he puts hooks in Gog's jaws. It's really Satan. Satan is just using, there's a seven-headed wild beast in heaven, and the dragon, and the one on the earth. The earthly one reflects the rulership of Satan. So Gog is an expression of Satan's rulership on the earth. Like the two-horned wild beast in Revelation, looks like a lamb, but again began speaking as a dragon. So Satan will be very much manifest at that time through this Gog and his coalition. So, Satan wants to get at him. Jehovah's protected him. He takes his protection away, then he restores it and bestows his favor upon his people. And then the hooks come, because God says, these are my 7,000 and their companions. Attack them again and see what happens. See if you can break one of them. Because as I said, if sealing and calling and choosing is all done, if just one of these sealed ones becomes unfaithful, what is Jehovah going to do? He has to start up a new, has to anoint someone else. And so it's irresistible. How can these 7,000 be faithful? Remember, Satan is the accuser of our brothers who accuses them night and day. That doesn't mean his accusations are false either. Because as Jehovah says, they have been unfaithful. The accusations are true. Satan has been able to lure Jehovah's Witnesses into all kinds of things, the leadership in particular. I think the most egregious is the atrocious way they've handled child abuse. It's bad enough that there are child abusers among Jehovah's Witnesses, but the thinking among the leadership, when these things come to light, and they tell the elders, don't do anything, call the legal department, and they check and see if crimes have to be reported in this particular locale, and no, they don't. Do not call the police, do not make these matters known. And why would they do that? To protect Jehovah's name, to keep it from reproach. What a laugh. What a laugh. They could not have brought more reproach on Jehovah's name had they tried. And maybe some of them, that's what they were trying to do. So, but once Jehovah cleanses his people and restores them, gives them his spirit in full measure, he has no more issues with them. He has forgiven them. That's what it says in that prophecy. And they will be his peoples, and Jehovah will be their God. It's over. He's punished them. His anger is subsided, and now he blesses them. But it's time for that final test. And so here comes Gog and his hordes to try to get one of them. Let alone, just if he could get all of them, that'd be great. But as a matter of fact, he does get them. It's not a big deal to kill people. We're pretty fragile. We're like tissue paper, X-rays go right through you. So do bullets. And, Satan has killed a lot of Jehovah's anointed, and all down through the ages. The first century, several of the apostles were killed outright, James and apparently Peter and John on the island of Patmos, Paul. So this is where Babylon the Great, she's full of the blood of the holy ones anyway, and the prophets. And even the Watchtower will become blood guilty. What did Jesus say? Brother will hand brother over to put them to death. Children will rise up against their parents. But here's the thing. Once the sealing has taken place, those dead in union with Christ have already joined Christ in heaven at that point. Then when these holy ones are put to death, they're instantaneously transformed into these immortal spirits. Remember back in the 6th chapter of Revelation, the opening of the 5th seal, those who have been executed by the axe, say, how long, Jehovah, before you execute judgment for us? And a white robe is handed them, and they're told to wait a little while until their brothers who are about to be killed are killed. So the remaining ones will be killed in the flesh, only to be transformed into these mighty spirit creatures. So they can't really die. In the blink of an eye, from flesh to spirit. And in that state. Now, if you go to the 13th chapter of Zechariah, it's talking about this attack upon Jerusalem, the restored Jerusalem, and as in the attack of Gog and Magog upon Israel, Jehovah's rage comes up into his night. And Zechariah said that they're like touching my eyeball. The reaction is instantaneous and ferocious. But when vengeance from God comes, Zechariah says, and Jehovah will come, all of his holy ones being with him, all of his holy ones. Daniel, the 7th chapter, the Son of Man gains access to the Ancient of Days. It brought him up close. Kingdom and rulership were given to him. And also, kingdom was given to the holy ones of the Supreme One. But it's after they're trampled by the beast. See how it all ties in? 3D chess, if you will, pieces of the puzzle. So all of the holy ones will be with Christ when they destroy Satan's world. And in that way, Jehovah will crush Satan under their feet, as Paul said to the Romans in the 16th chapter. So, yeah, there's a lot of things they don't know that they should know, but we're getting closer and closer. I mean, you see what's happening in the world. This thing is going to end very badly for the nations. And so again, I think it's great that the Watchtower uses this theme, be courageous, because that is what we'll need going forward, courage and faith, and hopefully to the few of you watching this, a little knowledge. And I know Jehovah's Witnesses aren't receptive to any knowledge that doesn't come from the channel, but, we keep chipping away, as I say. And again, I encourage you to pass these videos along, maybe a link to my book. By the way, it is available in Dutch. Someone in Holland actually translated my book and had it published as a hard copy. So there's links on jehovahisking.com, hyphenated. There's links to online French, online Spanish, online Dutch, and also hard copy in Dutch. So if you speak Dutch, you might want to check that out. So, okay, thanks for watching, and we'll try to do this again tomorrow.